I was 13 at the time. We lived in a quiet neighborhood that was just like any other. Rows of identical houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and SUVs parked in driveways. My parents were going to an out-of-town function that weekend. I insisted on staying home alone. Our house, a medium-sized two-story, was nestled right at the end of the street. I remember the Friday they left. Mom was fussing over food arrangements and emergency numbers. Dad was more chill, reminding me not to throw a house party. As night fell, I sprawled out on the couch, remote in hand, and a greasy pizza box on the coffee table. I had no specific plan, except to bask in my newfound freedom. But at around 1 a.m., as I was dozing off, there was this knock at the front door. I glanced at the security camera feed on my phone. A guy was standing there, his back to the camera. It was weird. I shouted out, "Who is it?" No response. "Hey, who's there?" I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. A bit on edge, I decided to sneak a peek through the side window. I could make out his outline, tall, wearing a hoodie, hands buried in his pockets. He seemed to be facing the door, just standing there. I was starting to feel really creeped out now. I decided to call my parents, but as the dial tone buzzed in my ear, I glanced back at the door and froze. The guy wasn't there anymore. I hung up and checked the camera feed. Empty. He was gone. Probably some prankster from the school. The rest of the night was uneventful except for the insomnia refusing to let me sleep. Eventually the morning came and I spent the day lazing around, assuring my mom on the phone that yes, I had eaten properly, and no, I hadn't broken anything yet. As night fell, a sense of dread enveloped me. I double-checked the locks, reassuring myself that I was safe. Around midnight, just as I was finishing an episode of Stranger Things, the knocking started again. It was the same persistent knock. I pulled up the camera feed. The same guy, same hoodie, standing at the door, his back to the camera. I yelled at him to go away, but he just stood there. I dialed 911 and explained the situation. The operator said a patrol car was on its way. When I looked back at the camera feed, the porch was empty. The police arrived, checked around the house, and found nothing. They said it was likely a prank, but agreed to keep an eye on the neighborhood. I thanked them, feeling a little better. The next day, every single sound in the house made me jump. I kept checking the camera feed obsessively. Night came and so did the knock, but this time he was early. The knocks echoed through the house. I pulled up the feed and there he was, looking straight into the camera. Something was very different this time. His hood was down and my blood ran cold as I saw his face. He had an unnaturally wide grin almost stretching from ear to ear, exposing unnervingly perfect teeth. It was the way his smile seemed to be almost frozen. I couldn't tell if it was a really convincing mask or if that was his actual face. I remember my parents had this big wall of closets where I thought I could easily hide amongst all their stuff. I pushed myself right to the back and called 911 again. The knocking seemed to reverberate around the house, growing louder and louder until it was all I could hear, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I was left there, huddled in the closet. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the police again. They were checking the house but had found no sign of anyone around. I told him I was in my parents' room and he said to stay put while they checked some more. As I ended the call, I had this nagging feeling that I'd forgotten to lock the back door. I felt sick with worry. Was someone in the house? I strained my ears, listening for any noise. Nothing, just silence. Then suddenly I heard a faint creak, like a door slowly opening. My heart pounded in my chest. Slow, careful footsteps were moving around the room. I clamped a hand over my mouth. The steps got closer until they stopped right outside the closet. I held my breath, praying, pleading for it to be the cops. The door creaked open, and then I heard a soft voice.
"You forgot to lock the back door, kid."
My heart pounded and my ears started ringing, drowning out everything else. I waited, but nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity, I dared to open my eyes. The room was empty. There was no scary, smiling man, just nothing. I stumbled out of the closet, my legs shaking beneath me. My phone buzzed again. I could barely pick it up as my hands were shaking so much. Thankfully, it was another call from the officer. "You okay in there, kid?" he asked. I told him I'd heard someone inside the house and that I'd heard him speak to me. I was terrified of every shadow in every corner, expecting the intruder to still be in the house. He told me to stay put again and that he'd come find me. I sunk to the floor, burying my face in my knees. I was a sobbing wreck. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching the room. I looked up to find 2 uniformed officers standing in the doorway. They checked the house but found nothing. I insisted that the intruder had spoken to me and then disappeared. The cops must have come into the house through the back door too, so surely they'd have seen something or someone. The rest of the night was a blur. The officers stayed until my parents got home, explaining what happened. My parents kept glancing over at me with worried eyes. The faceless man never returned after that night. So it was just my big bro and me, stuck at home that day. Yes, school was off the table, both of us sick as dogs. Our house has this semi-finished basement, the sort of place where forgotten furniture goes to die. But there's one room down there that was different. It was our craft room, our own personal playground, where we would lose ourselves in a world of fantasy miniatures. The day had just lazily crept up to the noon mark, and we were right there in the basement, engrossed in creating an epic battle scene, totally in our own zone. Suddenly, we were startled by a sound coming from upstairs. The noise was unmistakable. The front door being unlocked, swung open, and then closed again. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, making their way to the kitchen. The sound of running water as the tap was turned on, followed by the sudden silence when it was shut off. The footsteps continued, ascending the staircase to the second floor. My initial thought was that it must be my stepdad. It made sense since he usually came home for lunch around this time. I hurriedly picked up the phone and dialed my mom's number, eager to let her know that my stepdad had returned. She had just finished speaking to him moments ago and knew that he was still in his office at work. Confused, she called him back immediately, urging him to rush home as soon as possible. Without a second thought, my brother and I hid. We were just 2 terrified kids in the basement, crouched behind the old furniture, eyes wide, breath held. Our whole house seemed to hum with an intense silence, and all we could do was listen, hope, and wait for help to arrive. Time felt like it was crawling as we waited in tense silence. The minutes stretched on as we waited. We strained our ears, hoping to catch any sounds that would indicate the intruder's presence. Finally, we heard the roar of an engine as my stepdad's car screeched into the driveway. The front door swung open, and we heard his familiar footsteps thundering through the hallway. The sound of his voice, filled with concern and determination, echoed through the house. We heard him combing the rooms to check we were safe. His footsteps creaked throughout the house. Cupboards were flung open, closets were inspected, and every shadow was scrutinized for any sign of the intruder's presence. My brother and I dared not move, clinging to each other as we waited for any indication that the danger had passed. The minutes felt like an eternity, our breaths held in anticipation. Finally, the footsteps ceased, and my stepdad came down to the basement to tell us the house was safe. We released our breaths and emerged from our hiding place. The weirdest thing is that we'd never heard anyone come back down those stairs. And when my stepdad had checked through every corner of the house, it was empty, no trace of anyone. There was no explanation, no logic, just 2 scared kids in a basement and a mystery that we still haven't solved. We'd all graduated and moved into a house on the wrong side of town. One evening I was in my room texting my boyfriend. Suddenly, I heard this noise, a shuffling, scraping sound like someone was dragging furniture on a wooden floor. It was coming from downstairs. Being home alone, I was freaked out. I slowly walked down the stairs, holding my breath, straining my ears to pinpoint the source. I flipped the switch in the living room, but the sound wasn't coming from there. I walked towards the kitchen and the noise became louder, but it seemed like it was coming from underneath the floor. I don't think I've ever been so freaked out. Obviously, I thought about calling the police, but what if it was just a rat? Or worse, what if it was a ghost or we'd gone and rented a house with a poltergeist? That night I didn't sleep much. The strange sounds continued, sporadic but unsettling. I was too scared to tell anyone about it, scared they'd think I was making things up or worse, being dramatic. After all, we'd never heard these noises before. The following days, the noises continued. During the day, it was quiet, but at night, it was like the house had a life of its own. One day, I noticed our dog, Max, acting weird. He was always a chill, lazy golden retriever, but he'd suddenly become frantic, barking at the walls, scratching at them even. It was clear that something was off. One afternoon, a week later, my housemates had gone grocery shopping, leaving me alone in the house again with Max. As I was chilling in the living room, a muffled thud came from the wall, then another. I jumped up and Max started barking wildly. As much as I wanted to run out of the house, I decided to investigate, maybe find some evidence or capture something on my phone. I walked into the hall, following the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from behind one of the framed pictures on the wall. I lifted the picture and saw a small hole in the wallpaper, like something had been pushed out from the other side. Holding my breath, I peeled back the wallpaper, and there it was, an actual hole into the wall. Heart racing, I took my phone and used its flashlight to look inside. It was dark, dusty, and full of old wires and insulation. And then, to my horror, I saw a movement. A shadow flickered, and I could make out a figure moving further into the wall. I screamed, dropping my phone into the wall cavity. I ran out of the house and dialed 911 from our friend's house across the street. The police arrived in what felt like forever. I was a blubbering mess, but somehow managed to explain the situation. They searched the house and the crawl space underneath it. It was a while before they came back out, their faces grave. They'd found someone living under our house, a homeless man who'd been getting into the walls through a loose board in the crawl space. He'd been watching us, listening to us. The man had mental health problems, they said, and would be getting help. My housemates arrived home as they were taking him away. I've never seen them look so shocked. We fixed the hole in the wall, the entrance to the crawl space, everything. But the house didn't feel the same anymore. It was a while before I could sleep soundly, before I could shake off the creepiness of it all. I always wonder how long he was there and what he saw, what he heard. In the end, we moved, but I still check the walls sometimes, just in case.